So without further ado, we shall carry on with the session. With me here is, I'll say, a legend. Someone with irrefutable experience, someone who's nurtured the energy industry in the East African region. So I'll just let him take over from here. Andy Amadi, welcome.
Thank you. First of all, that's such an overwhelming introduction. I believe I'm just a practicing human being. I have been involved quite a bit in the energy sector, and it goes back to actually when I was in high school. That's the first time I got bit by the bug for energy, and it's actually what drove me to choose my career in chemical engineering. The problem that I was trying to solve then, and this is, I don't need much evidence to prove that I am old, but this was at the time of the first Gulf War, when the price of petrol and petroleum products went up. And as curious students in high school, before a science congress, we tried to ask the question, and we asked a silly question. Why do we have to rely on petroleum that comes from under the ground and it doesn't occur to everybody? Why can't we use a source of energy that we have plenty of? Why can't we use grass to be our source of fuel that we can be able to achieve transportation? And out of that question, did a theoretic talk on how to accelerate, because we knew that petroleum comes from decayed organic matter. So we said, how can we change the process conditions, or how can we simulate or make artificial conditions that you can just throw in your vegetation and get your petroleum out? And in the process, I met somebody who was a chemical engineer, and he described to me how it was possible not, and I became completely fascinated with that profession, and I chose that to be my career. So my interest, driven by problems, brought me to this place. So I'd say I'm a problem-searching person. I'm always looking for problems, not because they are hard, maybe because they are hard, but because it is in the solving of problems that that actually innovation comes out from.
Great. Thank you. So there is the wide and the thin of it. A lot of engagement, a lot of experience, I would say. And just before we take this maybe deep into conversation stage, I'd like to maybe have a sample of our expectations for this session, so that we address this conversation from a point of answering some of the questions and coming to resolutions that we'd like to see implemented. So maybe you have just 3 suggestions of what your expectations are for this session. Yes.
Yeah, my name is Ogion Bodawa. Kenya Renewable Energy Association, and I also have my own company, Smart Renewable Energy Consultants and Traders. Now, many people are asking, what is the rate for energy auditor? I know this touches on innovation, because in innovation, auditing is one of the innovation areas. So one to venture into it, and that's a very source of income. And there are very few energy auditors, and the price sometimes is not clear. I'll just give you an example, because some of us probably have done energy auditing. CAM gives a rate. Other people don't give any rate, they give what they want. Some ask you, how much do you want? So, Mr. Amadi, please, you are my boss. Let me clarify. Some people are running away from auditing.
Yes, first of all, we are partners and collaborators. There is no hierarchy in this area of pursuing common interest.
Yeah.
Now that's a good question, and one that I will disappoint a lot of my colleagues in the sector by saying, for me, I believe that the principles, the ideas, the direction of innovation in energy is towards lowering the cost. People don't care about anything except a reduced cost. Reliability, availability, cost, and when you have reached that level in terms of actualization, then you start looking at things like the environment and the climate and other noble ideals. In the rough and tumble of the businesses in Kenya, they are always looking for lower cost. So that room for innovation is how do you drive up your solution while lowering the cost. Because when you go to an organization and you tell them that it's going to cost you 1.5 million to be able to discover what it is that you need to do in order to reduce your cost, then that occurs to them as a cost. So there's room for innovative ways of looking around it without compromising on standards. A lot of it has to do with something that we'll probably be engaging with, that energy is one of the sectors that has greatly resisted being embracing information technology. You still find that a lot of the energy sector is still very manual. A lot of it is still very analog. If you're finding information, the process itself of doing, say, the energy audit is still, it's still expensive, because, for example, practical example that I give, because of the way that we do it also. If I'm coming to do an energy audit of this hotel and I budget that I'm going to charge them 30,000 shillings per day, and I spend 2 full days counting the bulbs, is that worth, in terms of value, both to myself and to the client, spending 60,000 shillings to count their bulbs, something that can be done by somebody at a lower skills level who will be just as good, maybe even better, because if that's what they specialize in doing, then they can probably do it better. So there are ways around how to be able to reduce the cost without compromising on the output. The other approach is to not center it on the process. Selling an energy audit is like selling a root canal. People may need it, but they don't want to be told that they need it. So you don't sell to them the energy audit, but sell to them the benefit, sell to them the savings, sell to them the sustainability, the reliability of their energy use, sell to them the increased productivity, the increased profits. If you went to an organization and told them, I can increase your profits, against telling them I can do an energy audit, you're likely to get very different outcomes. And then embed solutions to the process. So if you're providing an energy audit and you're going to leave them with the end product as a 76-page report, as opposed to if you're coming in with a value proposition of, we are going to cut down your costs by 20%, then you can see where the difference will occur. So it's an area of controversial. There's a bit of controversy around it, but there's also a lot of opportunity for those who are auditors to be able to see where the direction of the industry is going. If you look at automation of energy process, a set of monitoring systems, an algorithm, and a database will render the energy auditor obsolete. So until the energy auditor starts to embrace these opportunities, I've told people it's much better on an automated system. You can be able to manage 300 companies as opposed to the manual sequential process where, in all honesty, you could probably do 10 organizations in a year. If you have an automated platform that you're monitoring and identifying and providing solutions, you have a wider base of clients at a lower cost. Then that is solving the two problems of, one, there are not enough auditors to handle all the facilities, and two, that the audit services are expensive. So I would see it as a mixture of what can be done, as opposed to trying to force or trying to impose something that is good for the market, but the market is either not receiving the same message or not buying it. And that's unfortunately something that you have to deal with even at a commercial level and ask, is it worth my time if the market is not doing it, or how can I respond to what the market is asking for?
Thank you.
How do you, when you approach a potential client, how do you address the aspect of cost from your side as an auditor?
Yeah.
I guess that is what you are basically referring to.
Yes.
That any industry I go to, how do I decide how much I'm going to charge him? On what basis? And at the end of the day, the client has to realize the benefits he's going to get. Not after, after the audit has been done, right? He is convinced that the fees I paid the auditor was worth it. You know, how do you relate the...
Okay, I think that's a good question, and I'll go back to my history in energy audit. The first time I did an energy audit was more than 20 years ago, and I was employed in the organization that I was doing the audit for, and I was able to identify within the organization. So it was easy for me when approaching other organizations to use my own perspective as having done it within an organization to language it to them. So when I started doing energy audits, my first approach was using the energy service company approach. And what we did was we got a list of organizations and we told them we're going to come and look for opportunities to save energy, and we're also going to look for the investment to be able to pay for those opportunities so that you get a benefit at the end of it. And if we don't find an opportunity, or if you don't agree with our recommendations, then you can pay a fee of so much. So it was both successful and it was also a failure, in the sense that it got every door we knocked was opened with that approach. They said, oh, if you're coming on a performance-based, absolutely you're welcome to come in and look. It was a failure because we did not have the resources to implement it, and went back to them with a solution for them to seek the financing themselves. And then this is where organizations became smart, and where I see it's still also a success, in that when we recommended to one company, they looked at the opportunity, then they looked at how much they would pay us as a success fee for performance-based contracting versus how much they would pay for an audit. So they were going to pay 5 times more for successfully implementing it. So they said, you know what, I think your savings, you've given us information, but we don't agree with the level of the savings, so we're just going to pay you for the audit. And that way they paid us about 450,000 compared to about 2.2 million that they would have paid if it was successful. Now, had we had the investment, the money to be able to invest in the process and the savings, then it would have come at no cost to them. And I still honestly believe that this is the total commitment approach to energy management. So these days, I'll be honest, these days I react to what the customer is looking for. We already have a predetermined possible cocktail or solution. Some require further exploring, and some are no-brainer. So before even approaching them, I already have an estimate, a good estimate of how much they can potentially be able to save, and then focus on that approach. And sometimes I see I don't even need to do the energy audit itself. I don't need to do the process other than, say, for statutory or for fine-tuning what the real potential savings they are. I can just sell the benefit directly. So I don't need to come here and tell them that I can be able to replace these bulbs and get them 95% savings. I just package it as a value proposition that sell to you LED lamps, if possible, arrange for third-party financing, And then out of the savings, then you're able to pay for the cost, including the cost of the service. That resonates much better. Selling an energy audit, to be honest, I have not tried to sell an energy audit for the last maybe 4 years. Even though there's a market, it's mostly been just responding to people who are willing, and most of them are for statutory purposes. They want to comply. And when they want to comply, they don't really care about the output, they care about the cost. And they're going to look for whoever is going to give them compliance at the lowest cost. So I look at that, I'm not giving you value if I can't help to reduce your cost. And the audit is but a step in the process. And some would argue it's an important step for very complex systems. For some systems, it's a no-brainer. It's something that you can just implement and get the results. Yeah.
I'm curious. I'm not an engineer. I'm just a buyer, but I'm in the committee for energy in our company, and I'm curious. In terms of innovation, what I was hoping to get out of this as well, apart from these audit issues, was what role are you playing to ensure, like you take for example, most of our machinery equipment in Kenya compared to the US use more power. So what policies are being put in place to change the system so that we are able to, because it's ironic, we are third world spending twice as much to power machines than a first world country. I'm curious about that. The second thing I'm also curious about is through thinking about environment and innovation. I see like the plastics industry is thinking about recycling alone, yet I don't see the energy sector coming up with solutions for that can improve things. So I was hoping I would think something like that. And the final one, there's a time KPLC was trying to encourage use of infrared cookers. I think you've seen them in the buffet.
Yeah.
You can just be a little more audible for
Sorry.
the people.
Like in the buffet. So through that innovative solution, I know KPLC single-handedly was trying to do that to its customer. I'm curious to know. I've heard of Blu-ray, which is more efficient, which is more effective. How are we positioning ourselves? Because you see government forcing households to, if it's solutions for water heating, to buy that big contraption, fix it in your roof, 150,000. And there are solutions I'm thinking like can work like a battery where I just go plug, play, you take your shower, 20 minutes you're out, rather than have that something that can work like an instant shower. Is there anything out like that in the market, rather than have all industries which need hot water putting that big thing, even household level?
Okay. I think you've raised a number of questions. Let me just reiterate so that I don't lose track of the very important ones.
Okay.
The first one is equipment.
Yes.
So what's been done is that since I think 2013, we've developed standards for certain category of equipment. I think there are 7 standards. There's fluorescent bulbs, there's motors, there's refrigerators, there's I don't remember them all, but there are certain standards that have been developed for certain equipment. So what will happen ultimately is that equipment that are of a low category will either, because then the approach that is being used is not to use the burning approach. So they'll probably, if you're importing an incandescent bulb, it's probably going to have some additional tax on it. But it's also creating awareness to the consumer that this bulb, this motors is the best example, because
Yes.
people like to buy cheap motors,
Yes.
but they don't factor the running cost, of which the running cost of a motor over a period of 10 years can be 10 times the cost of buying that motor. While you could buy one for double the price and it has half the consumption. So that kind of rating creates awareness for people when they're buying. The energy management regulations also requires organizations or facilities that need to do energy audits to, one of the other conditions, the first one is to have an energy policy. Within the energy policy, there is a requirement that they will take into account efficiency of equipment when they are buying it. So an organization can be able to know that we might be buying, which is how a lot of industries and even hospitality, I've seen that a lot, that people buy secondhand from the markets and then they come and run it, but they don't look at the energy costs. And then the energy costs creep up on them, energy maintenance and other costs, and their cost of running becomes ultimately high in exchange for a low capital investment to begin with. So there's that. Some of the more advanced ways that this can be done, and already the process or the proposal is under development for water efficiency, where you're saying we're going to have benchmarks for processes, for industries, and we're going to have a baseline of comparison of like processes or like sectors, so that within the spectrum of consumption, you can be able to see where you are in the local market and also against international benchmarks. So there's always a direction of improvement based on actual data that is being collected. The same can be done for energy use. For example, if you take a common appliance like a fridge or a washing machine, they already have them. If you look at the ones that have the labels, they tell you how many kilowatt hours a year it's expected to consume. And you can be able to even project and see based on your equipment if it's either rated or not rated. If it's not rated, you know that it's consuming a lot. As a thumb rule, it's hardly likely that a rated or an efficient appliance will not be rated. Most likely it is consuming a lot. So there are those
Just to
telltales.
interject, I'm talking
Yes.
more about output power. It seems to be higher than most of the equipment which we require at domestic level.
Yes.
Such that what is happening is construction of housing. It's one of the big four agendas.
Yes.
The kind of power that somebody does to a house is
Yeah.
unnecessarily high.
Yeah.
What are we doing about it?
When you mean by the
No,
power,
yeah,
are you talking about the appliances in the house or the construction of the house?
the
Just to be clear.
wiring for appliances in a house.
The wiring.
Yes.
Okay, there's one thing that also shouldn't be confused, especially when talking about, say, America,
Yes.
is the voltage. The difference between voltage and power.
Yes.
That America runs on 115 volts, we run on 240 volts.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that we consume more power than them, because the power is in the amperes that are pulled by that. So if it is 115 volts, it will probably need 10 amperes for what a 230 volt system will use 5 amperes. So the kilowatts at the end of the day is what matters. And the kilowatts, to a large extent, yes, we don't have standards for efficiency, but that's where it shows up. It shows up in your efficiency. There are two ways you can save energy. You save on the power, your kilowatts, or you save on the time that it runs. And the total, the multiplication of kilowatts and hours gives you your kilowatt hours, and that's what you pay for. So depending on the control systems, depending on how they are designed, they can either draw low power and also reduce on the amount of time that they are on if they're intermittent, or they can either, like the ones like the buzzard, run at the same power throughout but run at a lower power outage. So I think what you're bringing up is an important aspect, and this is one of the things that a group of us have been having conversations about, which is energy literacy. You find energy is very confusing. You buy your charcoal in tins that are funnily shaped. You buy your firewood in bundles.
Yes.
You buy your biogas in meters cubed. You buy your gas LPG in kilograms. You buy your petrol in liters. You buy your electricity in kilowatt hours. So you have so many different units for energy, but you consume energy, say I like to use kilowatt hours because it's metric, but you consume in kilowatt hours and you pay in shillings, dollars, or whatever currency you're interchanging it. So if we could interpret all of these, you get instant visuals of certain things that consume more power. For example, what you've asked about the instant heaters, and we've raised this question that the 150,000 contraption, as you rightfully call it, in some cases, what is the unit cost of that water heating at 150,000, getting 4 hours a day, producing 150 liters per day over a period of 20 years. You did the calculation, it's 11 euro cents. What is the cost of gas, LPG gas, to produce the same output of heat with an instant connection where you just switch on, have a cylinder, 6 kilogram cylinder outside the bathroom, you connect the water and the gas piping, you turn on the tap, and you have instant hot water. 9 cents per kilowatt hour. So gas is actually cheaper than solar on the roof when you standardize and compare them on the same basis. So you do have a point there that yes, we have an abundance of solar electricity, but no energy is free, it has to be converted. And now this is where some of the innovation starts to come in. If you're using, you could use biogas, the same thing, we're just having a discussion over lunch, that you have instant shower that runs on biogas, that you can be able to also produce heat at the same value. There's processed agricultural waste that is a legitimate source of energy that nothing will beat it. All things equal, the amount of kilowatt hours you will get from either waste or to some extent energy crops, there's no other source of energy, particularly because of conversion, whether solar, wind or anything, that will be lower than that. Yet we have that as an abundant source of material that we are not harnessing. We don't look at agricultural waste as a strategic energy reserve as we do with the storage for petroleum products and the levels in the dams that are seen as very strategic energy reserves for the country. So if we shift how we're looking at energy, look at it universally, compare them on a neutral basis, then we start to get the true value of energy, and also we start to see where the advantages that are there, but at the same time you open up the room for innovation. There's a lot of really interesting things that are going on around, say, biomass, the traditional source of energy that we have, that is saying, look, we don't have to use wood fuel, we can use grass as a source of energy, and it's a legitimate source. It takes 3 months to grow, while trees take 6 years to grow, and that potential for expansion is such that the area of Turkana County can supply all the electricity demand of Japan. So it has got unlimited potential, yet it's not being used. But these are also areas of recent discovery that still require a lot, not necessarily a lot, but they just require focus on how to actualize them.
I hope you have some clarification there. Okay.
Yeah.
So, just a moment. I think I'll just take over maybe just some general questions first, as we get familiarized with this topic, before again we take another round of questioning, so that everyone at least is in a balanced state to understand the matters that are arising. So over back to you, Andy. Maybe you can help us clarify on energy and innovation as split units and how they sort of interact with each other. And then when we take a look at the Kenyan perspective, the energy mix here, we have a sort of imbalance because there is more usage in the biomass area. We have electricity, we have petroleum. So where does the potential lie for energy innovations?
Okay, I'll start with the first question and give a context that until around 1974, actually specifically to 1974, people never really thought about how to use energy conservatively, because it was abundant, petroleum was plenty, at least in the developed world, and it was cheap. So in the crisis that happened in 1974, if you recall, some from your current affairs and some from your history, that precipitated the need to find ways of using it as a finite resource. Fast forward to 1992, when the global the environment forum in Rio happened, and the world realized that the environment is at risk from human activities. And 2 years later, it started now getting a lot of evidence and discussion around climate change. So those two things, climate, the environment, and cost have been the drivers for innovation in energy. Now, coming back to the Kenyan context, the area of great need for innovation is around biomass. 68% of the total energy consumed in Kenya is in the form of biomass. Out of that 68%, only 6% can be accounted for. And even the 68 estimate, it's an estimate because one of the saddest stories in Kenya is that we do not have a certified laboratory for testing biomass. So you have to take a sample of biomass to Europe if you want to have an ASTM certified result, which is what any developer of technology, boilers, turbines, they will require that. They're not going to design on the basis of a non-standardized test for biomass. So those are areas of innovation and opportunity that there are. And again, it goes back to the gender discussion that 68% of the total energy consumed is biomass. Majority of it is used for cooking. But when it comes to discussions and representation, the dialogue, the quantity of conversation is skewed towards electricity and petroleum. Electricity being only about 10% of the total energy that is being consumed. And in terms of even importance, it's taken for granted that food is a given. It's not a given. Food does not occur by itself. Cooking of food, particularly in the rural areas, is almost a full-time occupation for particularly women who have to go out and collect that firewood. So I did a study recently in Rwanda, and we did some calculations based on real data that we had collected. And we said, okay, if we were to look at it as a supply stream of biomass, then what is the market size of that enterprise? Using about 2 million women spending a minimum of 1 hour a day collecting firewood, and the total energy value of that enterprise, and say, let's just price the time that they use on minimum wage, which doesn't exist, but there's a minimum cost for a bundle of firewood, and the total economy, hidden economy that is done under care is worth over $1.2 billion if you are to convert it. Yet the total investments in electricity, in all the other energy sectors, which they consider to be more important, is less than that. So there's almost a major conversation that needs to be had around defining the importance. If we are to define that importance by its absence, if that absence would happen, that for some reason the women who collect firewood choose not to collect firewood until they're paid, then the whole country would literally grind to a halt or starve. So those are the areas that we need to see. How can we be able to monetize that activity if it's going to be compulsory? Or how can you be able to account for the deficit that is being created, both in the lives of the people, the risks that they have to endure to be able to provide this activity? How do you make it easier? How do you make it more? How do you turn that from being a burden to being a source of income, of well-being? So those are the areas that require a lot of innovative thinking that goes beyond technology, goes into enterprise, goes into communication, goes into financing systems and all the like.
Sorry, I want to take us back to the lady's previous question, the comments that were made there, and I want us to be a little bit more practical. So I'm finding it interesting because I keep on hearing, there aren't really standards, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that systems aren't being implemented, etc., etc. So for me, that is almost like an innovation in itself. So in the absence of standards, what do we do?
Okay, I think
so perhaps the
yes.
experience from Kenya or elsewhere.
I think anecdotally what I've seen is that people are generally smart at the individual level. They are able to tell, especially when it comes to say things like cost. People figure it out fast enough. One of the things I observed was the uptake of LED bulbs across the country. there was a little bit of sensitization, and then there was a market-driven interest where I look at the small-scale businesses. That's where you're going to find the most prudent use of resources. And you start to see them one by one changing from incandescent bulbs to LED bulbs. I'm not sure if we even have a standard yet for the LED bulbs, but the uptake is there, and people are aware that this one saves more. Same thing with the cook stoves. The improved cook stoves is being uptaken by the small businesses, by institutions. The standards are not yet out. They've been developed, but they're not yet out. So on the one hand, people do intuitively know, and a lot of it is driven by cost. When they know that this one is a cheap alternative, then they find ways to embrace and develop it. So the standards is not the all. In fact, a lot of the times the standards is coming in lately, and the standards, the effect of it is creating just wider awareness, but almost intuitively people do have a sense of how they can be able to improve. But they also have to have the knowledge that they can improve. That's another barrier where people are resigned to, that's the cost and will pay whatever it is, as opposed to knowing that there's something they can actually do about it. And I see it through the conversations, through conferences, not like this one. There are many conferences and people are showing up that there is a strong interest in the topic of energy management, energy efficiency.
I hope that has shed some light. And just still dwelling on that, Andy, is now that we're talking of people being smart enough, at an individual level, is this a people-driven solution? Is this the technology? What's the balance when we're looking at innovations in the energy space? Is it more people-based? Is it more technology-based?
Innovation is always people-based. People-based in the sense that innovators are people, and it is almost the random connection between seemingly unconnected phenomenon that creates something new that drives innovation. Our understanding and our approach towards innovation sometimes is wanting, that you see adverts in the newspaper calling for innovative ideas, yet that is to the mass market, to the wider group. Innovation does not occur in the wide masses. Innovation occurs in the fringes. How do you get those people that are in the fringes? The media has done a lot in highlighting them. The innovative people are not going to be in this workshop. The people who are, they're going to be somewhere. They might not even know that the innovation is happening. And that is the sadness of how we are relating to innovation, that we are not discovering, we are not nurturing, and we are not going out to look for these drivers or these leaders. And to give an example, you asked a question about energy and say waste management. And within here in Nairobi, there's somebody who developed one chamber flexible biogas system which can be able to process waste, organic waste material, which is about 60 to, depending on where you sample, 60 to 80% of the waste produced is organic. So that can be now processed within these digesters that take a few hours to set up, depending on the size and the capacity. So those kind of things are out there. The same thing with the plastics. The technology has been around for a while. There are people who have modified pyrolysis plants and are able to process polythene, polypropylene, and other hydrocarbon-based plastics into fuel, into recycled fuel. So there are certain innovations, and the interesting thing about innovation is that the true innovators will innovate whether or not there's an incentive. Unfortunately for many here, basic survival is not a good incentive for being able to innovate. People need to be above basic survival in order for them to explore these capabilities. And there has to be a reward, not necessarily, well, monetary is always obviously good, but the incentives need to be aligned for innovators to continue innovating, as opposed to the disincentive that we see. We were just discussing over the launch of the mini grid in an island in Lake Victoria that was shut down because they didn't do the paperwork, while they could just have brought them up to legal requirement and continued to generate power where there's a need, rather than to completely disconnect them. So the environment sometimes is also hostile. There's an issue of the theft of intellectual property, where somebody without the resources goes to an organization that seemingly has resources, and the idea is hijacked and taken up, and they're left with nothing. So all those things tend to stifle the innovative capabilities. But fortunately, I think there is sufficient resilience, there's sufficient incentives, and there are amazing things that people are doing to be able to address those shortfalls. So innovation, in my opinion, is always going to be down to the people and down to the attitude and to the reception within the culture that they operate. By definition, innovators are defying, so to speak, the culture. They say that when it comes to disruption, there are no rules. They are actually making them up. So a lot of them are operating outside of the norm. And unfortunately, we seem to be still looking for within the norm. So all we find is a lot of replication, slight modification, while the big step advancements, we do not have effective mechanisms of tapping them and bringing them into the mainstream conversation.
So I'll pick 2 more questions, and then Andy can address them again as we go with another round of questions. So just for questions, please make them brief because we're running short on time. Okay?
Yeah, you talked about innovation being driven by people. Do you think that we can actually curate environments that will spur innovation? Because as much as we are saying it's sort of serendipitous, that ideas just come to people and they actually actualize them, is it possible that we can curate innovation? Especially, a lot of innovation comes from academia. So
Yeah.
is there a way that we can develop our educational system to nurture people who think outside the box, so as they say?
One more question?
Yeah, just to continue what he was asking about innovation being driven by people and not technology, and also technology now needs now to protect the innovation, because in most cases you find the innovation that came to bring a solution at the end even now is creating more problems than the solution. Like for example, when we come to the solar PV, you find it's a very good thing, but at the end, because there was no technology to protect it with the policies, you have seen smuggling of fake non-standard PV modules. At the end, when a customer is being installed such a system, it won't give him the output that was desired. So they had to find that yes, it was a good innovation that came to bring a solution, but at the end, because it's not giving the output, then it became it has brought even more harm than the solution we expected. So the question is, how do you ensure that the policies that are being made, they are being enacted accordingly, so that like now the ERC, it gives the licenses people to import. Does it go on now to certify every equipment that comes into the market, so that as an engineer, when I go and design and I give this thing to the customer, will he come to a point to oppose me saying that, yes, you give me this mortgage 30,000, but I have seen on the market just 10,000. Just do this one for me because I'm the one giving the money. So do we have the policy? How, as an innovation, how are these policies going to be enforced to ensure that whatever was innovated is going to give the right solution to the people?
Okay. Let me take the first question around nurturing innovation, particularly in institutions. Well, one, I do not come from academia, and I left academia very many years ago, so I really don't know how the systems there operate. But one thing I do know is that that is where there's a freedom of intellectual curiosity. That is where there's space for people to explore on the basis of knowledge in a controlled environment. And that ideally should nurture innovation. I think innovation is what I call a pyramid scheme. You're not going to get one. We seem to romanticize and think that innovation will be just this one great thing that happens. Even the greatest innovators, if we are to think of the names that we know of inventors, they went through sufficient iterations before getting there. Innovation a lot of times is disguised as failure. But what happens when you fail? And that's where the second part of the question comes in, is in putting the parameters of definition. And I got one very good example of such an opportunity. And I don't know if it's still there, but this was the description that was given to me by Kenya Breweries. They said, look, we produce a lot of this spent malt after beer. It makes mountains of material, which they sell at a throwaway price to pig farmers. But they were saying, how can we convert that into an energy resource? And not just converting it, that's easy, it can be done through a biogas digester, but how can we convert it to an energy resource that will deliver us electricity at 9 shillings per kilowatt hour? That's the full brief. And they said, if you find an answer anywhere in the world, even at 3 a.m., call me and we'll bring that person and we'll implement it. That's how I think you expand the opportunity for innovation, by giving specific challenges that are addressing real problems. With regards to policy enforcement, and that's, I really don't have an answer how to do that, other than we have many laws, many regulations that are not being enforced, and there's a crack in it. But it also creates room for innovation. In my contribution, in my submission to the solar PV regulation, I made this request and I said, I'll just give a caveat that it was rejected, but I said that of a certain size, that the solar system should come with an inbuilt monitoring system. At the time we were having these discussions was in 2009. So that if somebody says it is a 100-watt panel, you should be able to put it up just using hardware. That circuit board that has a SIM card on it costs $1. It's not going to break the cost of the entire system. And you can go online on your phone, put an IP address, and see that it is indeed producing 100 watts. And then it's supposed to have a 20-year warranty. So you say, okay, we're going to monitor this thing for 20 years. And in 20 years, you only expect to see a 20% drop after 20 years in the output. And then that becomes legally binding. And that's how technology can assist with enforcing regulations, by having monitoring. I think that discussion is going on across in the other room, but we've also said you can't manage what you don't monitor. The reason that that happens is there's no monitoring system. So the room for innovation there is, how can you be able to do that? Can you be able to put a monitoring system on a single lantern? Yes, it has been done. There's companies that have now reduced from our solar home systems to a solitary solar lantern. They've done it with regulators for LPG that can dispense after you pay by M-Pesa. You pay 10 shillings, it dispenses 10 shillings worth of gas. They've done it with cook stoves, improved cook stoves that have tracking systems that are able to see how much is being consumed, and so they can give away the cook stove for free, and then they sell you the fuel and they recover their money from that. So that's what I was talking about, the integration of information technology with energy. They're still far apart. The closer that they get together, the better it is. One good way that it has come out is with a prepaid. People now know what 1 unit of energy can do out of just practical experience that you're left with. So much money, you can only buy 5 units. They know what they can be able to do. So that having that information knowledge, and through certain technologies, they've now been able to become better managers of their own energy and their own prioritize for themselves what is most important. So short of how entire government is running and how we can implement policies across the board, the role that I see that can be immediate and give results is, again, the integration of information analytics and technology to address certain problems. Still a challenge of the people who understand energy do not understand programming and computing, and the people who understand programming and computing don't understand energy. So how about they have a conversation and come up with these solutions?
No, I'm just wondering how we talk a lot. In this part of the world, we talk a lot. This innovation conversation has been going on ever since. How do we shift, and I think the question is to all of us, how do we shift from just talking to action? Because we really do, if we could harness ideas, all the ideas are there. There are fabulous ideas walking around in people's heads, and we articulate them, because Kenyans, we talk a lot, so we say, but how do we shift from just talking to action? My people, how do we shift from talking to action? So I think if we can get that, we can make some headway. Yeah. So what do you think?
My contribution on that is that it's good we have brought this issue up. I mentioned that I teach at Technical University, and I'm a former student there. When I was a student, there was nothing syllabus of energy. And I think we better clap for ourselves because we didn't have anything. So me, my energy, I learned it through Kenya manufacture. Up to this minute, there's no syllabus. So you see, really, we are very far. And started the project, and to add on to all those problems, I approached my boss. School is not here. I told him I want to go and do energy at Statman. He told me, what is these things you are talking about energy? So you can see how far we are. Later on, through CAM, I don't know anybody from CAM is here. I hope there's the program, there's somebody from CAM, but I have not seen him. I hope he's coming. I would like to thank them because they laid out everything through their own way. CAM is not a government, it's just an association like Kenya Association, like Kerea. They put an advert in the paper that anybody who wants to do energy auditing, please pay so much, go to Mombasa, come to Nairobi, do your energy auditing. There was no curriculum. To them, that's the curriculum, what they had. So it was trial and error throughout, up to now. There's nothing called a curriculum. And therefore, to answer my sister Jesus, I don't know where I can go. Those are of how you're operating. That there's nothing laid down so that we can start saying it is good or it's not good and how we correct. Okay? But eventually, ERC was created. Now, I'm saying ERC was created long after CAM has already done all the basics about how to train people in their own way, using their own whatever they can call curriculum. Some people even say it's not a curriculum because it's not national. So you see all those are limitations. But the trial and error, we are here now. ERC was created long after CAM has already done everything and we already done energy. Then ERC now come with a policy and you are certified. As you are now, you can go and audit energy. You are now licensed T1, T2 through errors. And I wish more errors are there so that we continue. And unfortunately, again, in this forum, there was nobody from ERC probably who can clarify these issues. So I'm just talking as somebody who have come with errors all along up to here, and I'm still training at Strathmore, even at Technical University, with more errors, not curriculum. So I'm adding more errors. So when will the errors stop? Amadi, can you stop these errors? Can you streamline the errors there?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
I think to add to that,
Just as a final, a close friend of mine who is also my student, who through error I brought him in some programs of Strathmore. Now he's ready to be certified. He'll be applying very soon. More. He's sitting next to you. He's there next to you. Through those errors, I've already told you, please, you've already done the two-week course at Strathmore. You are eligible for more errors, and go and do an exam, and you may pass, and then become certified or licensed. But through errors, eh?
I think
don't know that I've done anything, but that's how many things are operating that way, erratically and correctly at the same time.
Okay.
Maybe we then have closing remarks or any final thoughts.
Yeah.
Maybe from the audience, and then Andy will help us wind up.
Okay, so we have about 3 or so minutes to wrap it up.
So we'll just give a chance to the audience to give in your feedback, give in your comments, because we need more feedback, we need more comments. Ask maybe, no, we won't take questions, we'll just take more suggestions, more insights. Anything that you've experienced from your industry that you can share with us in terms of innovation, and how we're going to, again, leverage on this and actually have solutions that you can implement. So,
Possibly if we could only do one thing, what would that one
yes,
thing be?
that one thing.
Yeah. To do one thing to have this energy innovation conversation shift to actual action, what's that one thing we need to do? Individually and collectively. If we live with that, then we have something tangible we can go and start working with. In our offices, in our homes, in the groups that we work in the associations that we are in the conversations we have online and in communities. I think that would be great to get.
I think we should, as a country, should put more funding on the research, because I think this will form the basis of innovation. So that is the one thing which I think will make a difference.
That's a substantial point.
Another thing just to add on him is, as a country or as an individual, we need to appreciate where we are and accept the condition we are in and not run away from the truth. So that when you accept the condition you are in, is able to open your mind, to open your eyes and see exactly what do I need to do here so that now I get out of this hole. So accepting where we are and appreciating where you are also will open your mind to innovate more so that you get a solution for a better.
I think we should train more women, because if you think of the issue of biomass power, if you don't educate them on biogas, because most of these rural women have animals, they have access to these other matters. So I believe that probably policy should make some of these things like the tank that you're talking about. I think JKUR have also done it through JICA. More affordable, maybe should come in zero rated by government. Just empowering the women, I think you'll be able to get across to more people, because you seem to be educating a lot of engineers, and yet the user, it's not rocket science for me to have to pay for that to be installed. I don't need to be an engineer, but once I'm educated, I'll reach so many other women because we are always using that product. Yeah.
I completely agree that we need to channel a lot of funds towards research. Research is the basis of which innovation happens. And we also need to remove the barriers towards access to research funds, because the funds are there, but the criteria, a lot of times, unfortunately, people want to see tangible results from research, then that is not research, that is confirmation. Research, you're exploring what you don't know. And then that exploration can now be built on what you know or what can work to create a solution. I agree that we need to engage the regulators more, and I have been personally engaged with them, and they've been receptive to some new ways of looking at finding solutions. For example, they're ready to discuss creating a framework of pricing of kerosene on the basis of save as you go. We know pay as you go, but save as you go means that consumers can continue paying for the product, but as they pay, so long as they're paying with a method that can be traced, they can build up the amount of money they need to be able to buy the replacing product. So those things are there. The key thing, I completely agree, is we cannot have the conversation without these key collaborators and partners. And I think once you reduce the barriers and increase the amount or the resources, then I think we need to understand also at a personal level how everybody can innovate. That's something I believe. Innovating is just taking time out to just think of things out there that could be done. People can do that, but unfortunately, a lot of these end up in the cemetery. People go to die with their ideas because they're afraid, because there is no fair system to accept them, and and those are challenges. But there are solutions. For instance, there are people who have developed a standard for accounting for human capital based on the blockchain technology, which would actually mean that you could go with an idea or with an intellectual property that can, in its development and in its value addition and in its implementation, be followed by actual payment of money, so that your ideas are on an immutable system that cannot be changed, and your intellectual property is protected by a system that is practically impossible to hack. So those kind of lowering of the barriers, I think, will encourage more people to innovate. And the last thing, I think what you're saying, what you're calling these crises, these problems, there is the opportunity. We are now, some of the best reasons for innovation is cost of energy. We are currently at the highest ever cost of electricity, the highest ever cost of all petroleum products. They've never been this high before. Already new ideas are coming in. Conversion to electric vehicles is becoming. There's already on-demand electric taxis operating in Nairobi. So people will adjust. That will be the ultimate driver that will make people adjust. That and availability. So yeah, to wrap it up, I think it's an area that the more people become literate, the better, energy literate, let me call it that, the better their chances of participating. The inclusion of women into the discussion is very important. You cannot have meaningful development with half the population missing when they are 95% responsible for 68% of the energy you consume. So that is an area that absolutely needs to be addressed in any kind of solutions that we are looking at in the field of energy. Thank you.